Star Wars The Clone Wars is one of the greatest additions to the Star Wars universe, and arguably one of the greatest animated shows of all time. It took familiar characters and lore and expanded upon them while forging its own identity. After a somewhat rocky start with the animated film, The Clone Wars set on a journey of harrowing growth. New characters and settings were introduced that showed the audience a fuller perspective of the galaxy, while familiar ones were given the chance to experience journeys not shown before. The Clone Wars also, crucially for what we're talking about today, offered second chances to characters who couldn't be properly explored in their first outing. Perhaps the most important of these was a character that no one expected to return. Being sliced in half and falling down a seemingly bottomless pit is a death sentence in pretty much any universe. Yet, all things are possible through the Force, and that reactor shaft is no longer bottomless. We've seen the story of Maul's return in Second Fall in the Clone Wars, and we saw his final end in Rebels. There was also his cameo in Solo that showed he managed to get the Shadow Collective back together. Now we finally get to see some of what happened in between. Let's dive into Maul Shadow Lord's first season. Darth Maul was molded to be a weapon of the Sith from a very young age. Much of his early life was uncertain or entirely unknown for quite some time, but we'll get more into that when we dive into the new show. His first on-screen appearance was of course in The Phantom Menace, where he served as apprentice and assassin to Darth Sidious. Though he was shown to be a formidable and acrobatic warrior, we didn't really get to know him at all before his demise. He was replaced as Sidious's apprentice by Darth Tyrannus, more commonly known as Count Dooku. The Count led the formation of the Confederacy of Independent Systems and oversaw the spark of the Clone Wars. During that conflict, he took on a young Dathomirian named Asajj Ventress as his own apprentice and assassin. When Sidious no longer tolerated her and ordered Dooku to kill her, she returned home to the Night Sisters and sought revenge. Part of this plot involved using Maul's brother, Savage Opress, as something of a sleeper agent. He was magically enhanced by Mother Talzin, and though he and Ventress failed to kill Dooku, he did end up finding his long-lost brother. Maul had managed to survive his wounds, and the fall into a trash container, by holding on to his hatred of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and ended up subsisting on scraps beneath the surface of Lotho Minor. Savage found him through an amulet that had been enchanted by Mother Talzin, and brought him back to Dathomir where his mother made him whole again. The Zabrak brothers built up an underground Shadow Collective and seized control of Mandalore, catching the attention of Darth Sidious in the process. Maul's former master traveled to Mandalore where he dueled the brothers and killed Savage, but left Maul alive for some unknown purpose. He continued ruling Mandalore for some time until he was defeated and captured by Ahsoka Tano. Before Maul Shadow Lord, the next time he appeared on screen was on Malachor V in Star Wars Rebels. Multiple Inquisitors had hunted both Maul and Ghost Squadron and had followed them to the planet. During an unplanned separation from Ahsoka and Kanan Jarrus, a young Ezra Bridger happened across Maul and began to be manipulated toward the dark side. Though these efforts ultimately failed, as did Maul's attempt to gain control over the mass shadow generator, he continued on his quest for vengeance. Ezra kept the Sith holocron he had retrieved on Malachor, which would later be combined with Kanan's Jedi holocron in an attempt to gain insight. The fusion was broken prematurely, which resulted in a direct mental connection between Ezra and Maul through the Force, and only fragments of information being gained. All was revealed later during a ritual on Dathomir where Maul learned that Kenobi was in fact still alive on Tatooine. He traveled there, hoping to finally kill his old nemesis under the Twin Suns. After luring Kenobi out and sensing that he was there to protect Luke Skywalker, Maul engaged him in a very short duel where he was again bested. The former Sith, Shadow Lord, and son of Dathomir died in the arms of the man he had fallen to long ago, comforted by the knowledge that Luke would in some way avenge him. Not counting the cameo in Solo, Maul's last on-screen appearance was nearly a decade ago. He was portrayed initially by Ray Park, who has also provided motion capture for some of his duels in the animated shows. In every appearance after The Phantom Menace, however, Maul is brought to life by Sam Witwer. This actor is no stranger to Star Wars, or even sci-fi as a whole. He has played many other roles in different media, including Emperor Palpatine, the Sun, and perhaps most iconically, Starkiller. The playable character of The Force Unleashed was also modeled after Witwer. That's not super relevant, he's just hot. When it was announced at Star Wars Celebration Japan in 2025 that a certain fallen Sith Lord would be getting his own show, hype immediately began to build. Witwer would be returning as Maul, and the show was to be animated in a style that can best be described as an evolution of what the Clone Wars used. It was made very plain from the beginning that this would not be a redemption story. Maul is not a good guy. But, as with everyone, there is more to him than meets the eye. We may not be in for a happy tale here, but it is an important one. Maul Shadow Lord opens on a bank heist in Janek City. The crew is surrounded by local police before they can load up the credits and get away, but the police are massacred by Maul. A Jedi Padawan is arrested for theft after trying to steal fruit to feed her master. Captain Brander Lawson and his droid partner Two Boots investigate the bank robbery and later book the Padawan after she refuses to give them her name. While reviewing footage captured by one of the destroyed police droids, they recover an image of Maul which is linked to a classified Imperial file that directs them to report any sightings immediately. Lawson orders Two Boots to wait, despite the droid's enthusiasm for following protocol. Turns out the bank robbery was orchestrated specifically to spark conflict between two rival crime lords and former Shadow Collective members. At a meeting between Nicodemus and Ludi Vario, the expected conflict plays out and Vario ends up shooting Demas. Vario is later recovered by the police after Maul's crew fail to take him out, which leads to a jailbreak for both Vario and the Padawan. Unfortunately for both, one cell is traded for another. Vario is coerced into helping further Maul's plans to reclaim the Shadow Collective, while the Padawan is goaded into freeing herself with the Force. The Jedi Master reveals himself briefly to save some innocents from destruction caused by Maul during the crew's escape from Police HQ. Lawson returns home to his son Riley briefly before seeking out an old contact named Marina Sol to get more information on Maul. Using information from Vario, Maul steals a Pike freighter filled with spice. These first two episodes introduce nearly all of the major characters, including Spybot, the Zabrak brothers Icarus and Scorn, and Maul's second-in-command Rook Kast. They also introduce the major themes. Janix is, for the moment, mostly free of Imperial influence, even though it is technically part of the Empire. Riley's mother is shown to be an Imperial officer who left for work, and his father is adamant about keeping his world free from Imperial oppression. Then there are the Jedi hiding from the Empire, and the reforming Shadow Collective that seeks to fight it. One might think these groups all have goals that are aligned, but they differ greatly in their methods. This show makes it very apparent very quickly that personal philosophies and self-imposed restrictions do not always serve well when facing tyranny. A Jedi steals food, a police captain ignores protocol, and a former Sith Lord allows a betrayer to live. All of these actions are out of character and are directly motivated by the threat of the Empire. In an actively hostile political climate, people do what they must to survive. The trick is not losing the core of who you are along the way. After escaping from her cell, Devon Izara has a brief conversation with Maul over tea before snatching one half of his lightsaber and trying to flee. Maul responds by killing the lights and taunting Devon as she climbs her way to the surface. Following a brief duel at the top of the climb, he reclaims his weapons and she makes her escape. Captain Lawson is reminded of his son's Bodican match by Two Boots and is encouraged to attend, with the droid saying he can continue the investigation on his own for a while. Lawson arrives right as the game is starting and offers Riley some encouragement. He is then approached by Jedi Master Iko Diodaki, though the latter introduces himself as simply Daki, uncle to Devon. While Lawson is at Riley's game, Two Boots and another officer head to the location of the next suspected Pike shipment. There's another attack by Rook and the rest of the crew, which leads to Lawson being called away from the game. Two Boots once again mentions bringing in the Empire, which Lawson orders him not to do. Vario travels to Obadiah with payment for the Pike's lost spice, and seemingly thwarts an assassination attempt on the Pike leader, Marg Krim. Unfortunately for Krim, the Zabrak that was stunned was not Maul. The real Maul slaughters Krim and most of the Pikes in the throne room, leaving Cult in charge. Devon reunites with her master and they discuss Maul. She insists they should protect the locals from him. Janix Civil Defense receives a tip from, quote, Uncle Daki regarding Maul's location, prompting Lawson to put together a strike team. Two Boots goes to contact the Empire, but Lawson deactivates the droid before he can. The strike force walks into an ambush set up by Maul, though he does offer an alliance before fighting breaks out. While his crew battles the police, Devon and her master duel Maul in the upper levels. Daki is injured, but he manages to damage Maul's right leg before he escapes. Reinforcements arrive, led by Two Boots. Lawson apologizes for deactivating his partner, and the droid replies that he has already forgiven him. He then follows that, saying he hopes that Lawson can forgive him as well. The Empire arrives. Episodes 3 and 4 set the stakes. Maul's plans for revenge become more real as he begins trying to turn Devon to the dark side to become his apprentice. Even the conversation that he has with Master Daki before the duel is for Devon's benefit. Her momentary pause, processing Maul's words, shows just how easy it can be to lose long-held beliefs. It's a reminder that the little compromises we make when times are difficult can add up to lead to very unfamiliar places. The Empire quickly begins tightening its grip on Janix. Lieutenant Blake takes control of the Civil Defense Force and sends Chief Kleiss to an interrogation she doesn't return from. Lawson is later interrogated by the same Inquisitor, but is released after professing that he knows nothing that wasn't already in the investigation. Devon and Master Daki try to escape the city and make it to the surrounding forest, but are stopped at a train station. Riley goes looking for his dad because he's been unresponsive since the Empire showed up and is escorted out of the station. He returns home and contacts his mother, who assures him that the Empire has good intentions. Later, when his father finally returns home, Devon and her master are there. Following dinner and a short conversation, the Lawson's apartment is raided by Marok, the first brother. The Jedi defend Captain Lawson and his son as they make their escape, and Lawson takes them to Rena Sol in hopes that she will be able to help them leave the planet. Stormtroopers raid the nightclub and all four fugitives make it out, though Riley and Devon end up on their own. The younger pair end up at a train station, but Marak catches up with them before they can get away. Maul comes to their aid and Devon slices a coupling, allowing the trio to escape. Marak reports to an unidentified figure via hologram and asks how he should proceed. Here we get the smallest taste of fascist takeover and agents being given the authority to operate outside the law. The general public is suddenly under much more scrutiny in their daily lives, and their freedoms begin being restricted, all in the guise of an interest in safety. What the Empire does on Janix, while not surprising given similar actions elsewhere, is a jarring display of military might. It is designed to instill fear, and it's the exact reason why Lawson and others didn't want them involved. Maul leads Devon and Riley back to his hideout where his crew is preparing to leave, though the kids have no intention of staying. What was to be their escape attempt is interrupted by a stormtrooper attack, and Riley is captured. Marak is present for the landing of another Inquisitor ship containing Crow, the 11th brother. Devon reunites with Lawson and her master, and the trio begin working on how to free Riley. The Inquisitors and their stormtroopers ambush Maul and his crew as they attempt to make their escape. Maul faces the Inquisitors while the crew tries to hold off the stormtroopers. This leads to Maul's leg being further injured and multiple casualties among his crew, as well as the loss of their ship when it was shot down after being stolen by Mandalorian deserters. Marak and Crow corner Maul, but he brings down the cavern using the Force. Maul makes a harrowing journey through the Janix underbelly while having visions from his past. He eventually reunites with what remains of his crew and is notified by Vario of an offer from Dryden Voss of Crimson Dawn. Lawson and the Jedi free Riley with the help of Two Boots and go to meet Rena, who has secured them transport off-world. This turns out to be a trap that they narrowly avoid, and they continue running from the Inquisitors. Things are moving rapidly toward a conclusion now, with only 2 episodes left. Walls are closing in, both for the main characters and the citizens of Janix. It's becoming increasingly clear that fighting an organization like the Empire is nearly impossible to do alone, and will require more sacrifice than anyone may have imagined. Even those with power, whether that be literal in the case of Maul and the Jedi, or authority in the case of Lawson, are made insignificant next to such an oppressive regime. Janix is placed under an immediate and indefinite planet-wide curfew, for which the penalty of going out is death. Devon has a vision of a fountain via her connection with Maul, and the fugitives go to the nearby Armistice Fountain to meet with him. They make a tenuous alliance and begin an underground trek out of the city via a forgotten tunnel beneath the power station. Progress is stopped by an acidic lake where the only means of crossing is a tiny skiff that was only meant for one person. Spybot ferries people over to it at a time while Maul and the Jedi fight the Inquisitors who have caught up with them. Most of Maul's remaining crew is killed, and Spybot is sliced in 2 by Marak before Maul managed to make it across. Those that remain head out into the forest to meet Dryden Voss. Marak orders the Stormtrooper commander to inform, quote, him that the fugitives are headed his way. Rook and the remaining Mandalorians scout ahead but are quickly taken out by a figure shrouded in the mist. Darth Vader reveals himself. The group splits, with Vario leading Two Boots and the Lawsons toward the rendezvous point, while Maul and the Jedi defend against Vader. He proves to be an overwhelming opponent, both in force strength and raw physical power. Eventually, the Inquisitors catch up and end up splitting Devon off, which gives Maul the opportunity to sabotage Daki and get him killed. Devon taps into her rage, and Maul lends her one half of his saber when she is disarmed. Lawson sacrifices himself to ensure Riley is able to board Voss's ship. Devon finally relents and agrees to become Maul's apprentice. This finale arc demonstrates the potential dangers of the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Though none of the individuals involved could fight the Empire on their own, at least one of them had their own aspirations to rule once the Emperor is felled. Fighting tyranny becomes very difficult while also having to constantly guard from betrayal. Maul Shadow Lord is of course a story of the fallen Sith plotting his revenge from the underground, but it's also a story of oppression and how that can change a person. Beliefs that were once held steadfast become less important when weighed against survival. And of course, there are always other less than benevolent forces at play as well. While we don't know yet what Devon's journey has in store for Maul's 2nd season, we do know roughly where Maul ends up. What remains to be seen is how deep Devon falls into the dark side, and what becomes of her following an inevitable betrayal.
You survive, but you do not live.
This story was a long time coming. When Maul was introduced as the original apprentice of Darth Sidious, he immediately gained a lot of interest, and rightly so. However you feel about the decision to bring him back in the Clone Wars, he is a provocative antagonist. His personal struggles, especially as explored in this series, showed that sometimes nurture overwhelms nature. Not that Maul was particularly nurtured. And of course, Dathomir was a dark side nexus. But even then, Maul was a fairly timid, even meek child. He was molded into a weapon through his master's abuse and manipulation. Theoretically, this could happen to anyone. I really appreciate that this story was told specifically in a way that didn't try to give Maul any sort of redemption arc. Though it certainly showed a different side of the character, and much more depth that hadn't been allowed for in previous appearances, there's no question that Maul is still only on his own side. This is something that I have been hoping for in Star Wars for years, not even just specifically for Maul, but for any of the Sith. Not only was Knights of the Old Republic one of the greatest video games in the Star Wars universe, but KOTOR stands as one of the greatest RPGs of all time. Telling a dark story centered around someone who would traditionally be an antagonist works. Showing another perspective allows writers to explore moral issues and ethical questions differently. But of course, this story was not all about Maul. It was also about the Lawsons, Devon, and the Shadow Collective. Viewers were shown the everyday struggles of living under oppression. Captain Lawson mentioned a couple times that what he was told about the Jedi never made sense, but questioning propaganda is difficult when there are no other perspectives available. Riley was torn between his mother and father and their vastly differing views on the regime. Devon was forced to reckon with a galaxy that turned against her for reasons that were difficult to explain to someone with relatively little life experience. These characters from widely varied backgrounds found themselves as unlikely allies despite the fact that they would have commonly supported each other even 5 years prior. Political and social structures can change seemingly overnight depending on the prevailing voice, which makes it immensely important to stay connected with each other. Thematically, while Maul is front and center, and we do get to see some of his backstory, much of the story progression revolves around Devon. She was of course dealing with a lot of turmoil following the Jedi Purge and witnessing the decline of her master, which would be a lot for anyone to handle. But she was also manipulated by someone who sought to use her to further his own ambitions. Many of us who have grown up in uncertain times can likely relate. Just in my lifetime alone, I've seen multiple wars and financial crises, and there have been plenty of opportunists taking advantage of those who feel hopeless or unsure of future security. Manipulation comes in many forms, from removing stabilizing voices to refocusing righteous anger at a system and its leaders toward marginalized groups. In Devon's case, Maul manipulated her sense of justice and caused the death of her master. The most important takeaway here is to be mindful of the prevailing rhetoric, and remember that we all have more in common with each other than we are told. From a production standpoint, there's very little Maul could have done better. Animation and fight choreography are both gorgeous. Evolving the animation style of the Clone Wars into this new form where large environmental shots look almost like oil paintings was an inspired choice. The fight choreography was also beautifully done, which is even more impressive considering the animations were made without the motion capture that was used in Season 7 of the Clone Wars. Musical themes were top-notch as expected from the biggest space opera, but I also love the range of electronic sounds that were included throughout. While Star Wars has always worked well with its iconic orchestral themes, the electronic instruments helped to better show a view of the everyday galaxy in my opinion. Voice actors gave admirable performances as well. Sam Witwer gave an exceptional performance as Maul, surprising no one. But all of the other actors were able to inject incredible emotion of their own, which elevated the impact of every scene. Despite the relatively short time they had to tell this story in, each episode was well paced and constituted a meaningful piece of the overarching journey. In addition to being a visual marvel, there were also quite a few important pieces of lore that weren't directly highlighted, but show a commitment to continuity. Maul can be seen wearing Savage's enchanted pendant that he used to locate his brother on Lotho Minor. This is the only thing in Maul's possession that ties together both his mother and his brother. Despite any flaws they may have had, they were also his only family and therefore make up a not insignificant part of his intense need for revenge. There are also of course many oral Easter eggs and callbacks since those are very easy to do as part of character entrances or memory sequences. During Maul's breakdown after his solo fight with the Inquisitors, he remembers many traumatic events from his past. This includes being taken from Dathomir, the laser gates from his duel with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and the death of his brother. Multiple scenes include previous themes, such as the Imperial March as a Star Destroyer descends over Janek City, and a reprisal of that during Vader's entrance. Another couple of references involve the two prominent droid characters. I actually really appreciated how Spybot and Two Boots were portrayed in this series. They had much more personality than most droids, outside of the obvious duo and a few other exceptions. Two Boots specifically also struggled with logic and procedure versus intuition, and felt the full impact of both the Empire's cruelty and its disdain for droids. I actually recently made a video comparing synthetic and organic intelligence if you're interested in checking that out. Fortunately, he was still a fairly lighthearted character and a voice of much needed hope. He also had a scene where he jumped onto a moving speeder. Well, trash barge in this case. Very similarly to how Anakin did in Attack of the Clones. Spybot as a character could easily be multiple references. He might just be my favorite new character from the show, though he's neck and neck with Master Daki. We haven't seen too many antagonist droids in the past that weren't just dumb B1 or B2 battle droids, so it's a bit refreshing to see one with so much personality. I could easily see Spybot actually achieving the popularity that BB-9E was never able to. But anyway, the character reminds me a ton of Smeagol from Lord of the Rings. He speaks with a very similar tone and cadence, and is of course constantly lurking menacingly in the shadows. That's not all though. Spybot was voiced by David Collins, who also happened to voice Starkiller's holographic training void Proxy in The Force Unleashed. Speaking of that game, Maul Shadowlord is absolutely dripping in its influence. Most obviously, Maul is voiced by the same guy that played Starkiller. Though Witwer's performance for Maul is different in tone to that of Starkiller, It's just as intense. According to Whitwer, his dog even gets scared whenever he gets into character as Maul. He routinely displays raw emotion outside of the usual menacing low tones of both roles. This tends to take the form of guttural screams, which I'm sure terrifies Buster even more if Whitwer practices that at home. Maul actually almost serves as a stand-in for Starkiller in this series. Their journeys are not dissimilar. Both were trained and used as assassins, and both were betrayed by their masters. Though the specific circumstances differed, they were each forced to find their own way in the galaxy. Neither would fully forsake the dark side, but they both tempered their rage somewhat and gained a more complete view of the Force. They also apparently shared many of the same Force talents, excluding lightning. Maul's quick destruction of an AT-ST outside of the power plant is a near exact recreation of one of Starkiller's finishing moves on the same vehicle. Following his jump across the acid lake below, Maul also adopts a stance with his split-hilt sabers that reflects Starkiller's preferred combat stance. Additionally, Ludivario seems to be a reference to one of Starkiller's early Jedi foes. Though the Alina race was first introduced in The Phantom Menace via one of the pod racers in the Boonta Eve Classic, one of its most prominent appearances before now is no longer canon. Jedi Master Kazdan Paratus was the second surviving Jedi that Darth Vader sent his secret apprentice to kill. He was a master droidsmith and powerful in the Force, also making use of mechanical limbs to augment his small stature. But none of these things proved enough to help him defeat Starkiller. Of course, he was also driven mad by his isolation on Raxus Prime, which likely made him an easier target. Vario similarly used mechanical augments, at least at his introduction, but this took the form of a fully mechanized suit of armor. Outside of the suit, he was still cunning and could move quickly when he needed to, but he was far less capable physically. Because this show seems to share so many parallels with The Force Unleashed, I can't help but look at it as a way to sneak some of what the game introduced back into canon. Following Disney's purchase of Lucasfilm in 2012, much of the expanded universe media was struck from canon. This meant that while these stories could still be consumed and enjoyed, they were no longer officially a part of the Star Wars galaxy. It's clear that many of the ideas behind Maul Shadowlord came from Vader's secret apprentice and were intended to pay homage to what technically never happened. Now it feels that on some level, Starkiller and his journey have been recanonized. We know that Maul will get a chance to tell more of his story in a second season, which is in production now. There's still over 10 years to explore before his eventual death on Tatooine, and we know basically nothing about what goes on during that time. Just thinking about that, I have a few questions that stick out in my mind. First and foremost, what happened to Devon? She is not present with Maul on Malachor, nor is she mentioned by the fallen Sith. This could very well be another case of Sith betrayal, or she could have returned to the Path of the Light. I also have questions about Maul's weapons. The Darksaber was notably absent from Season 1, which could be the beginning of an explanation for how it ended up in the hands of Moff Gideon. Interestingly enough, Maul's personal weapons are not present when we catch back up with him in Rebels. He still uses a double-bladed lightsaber, but this one has a solid hilt and a curved protrusion on one end. Of course, the likely and obvious answer is that his current weapons were lost or destroyed somehow, but I would love to know how. At least one half of his current lightsaber is shown to be more in tune with the Force than most. It whispers in an unknown language on multiple occasions, and is implied to be part of what began turning Devon to the dark side. There are other questions that began to be answered toward the end of Season 1, which appear very likely to be expanded upon in Season 2. Maul Shadowlord's subtitle is of course a reference to the Shadow Collective. Though Maul was shown to be in control of Crimson Dawn via his solo cameo, there is no indication of how he got back to that point from the end of the Clone Wars. Here, we see Maul forcibly reconquer multiple syndicates and make a deal with Dryden Voss to install him as leader of Crimson Dawn. But that leaves me to wonder, where has the Shadow Collective gone by the time of Rebels? We know that, at bare minimum, the Pikes are still operating after the Empire's official fall. Was Maul still pulling the strings from the shadows up until the point of his death? This seems unlikely given that he appears to be operating entirely on his own at that time, but hopefully Season 2 will tell us more. Overall, Maul Shadowlord was reliably dark in tone while still being light enough to not be bleak. It was properly reverent of its inspirations and the non-canon material it drew from. I have long said that Star Wars has often been at its best in animated shows, and this is no exception. This show built upon what came before, from the Skywalker Saga films to the Clone Wars and Rebels series. And just like both of those previous shows, it was not limited by its visual medium. Many animated shows get written off as quote kid stuff, but all three of these examples consistently explored more mature themes in very accessible ways. Plus, as I said previously, it's very pretty for both the eyes and the ears. Getting to see more of, in my opinion, the most interesting Sith Lord was always going to be a win on some level. Maul has long been my favorite baddie in the Star Wars universe, and I was ecstatic to see how this show turned out. I may be biased because of that, but I found it very hard to pick out any major flaws from this show. Despite wanting to see more, I think the number and pacing of episodes works well for the story being told. It allows the writers to manage conflict very well while still giving time for personal moments like Riley's game. In fact, really the only complaint that comes to mind for me is that certain supporting characters like Rook, Scorn, and Icarus were given little to no backstory. But, arguably, they didn't need it. The story wasn't about them. Art is also reflective of the goings-on of the real world. Rehashing Order 66 may be nothing new at this point, but the specifics of the Empire's descent on Janix and everyday folks like the Lawsons fighting for survival are frighteningly relevant. This show asks a lot of questions to those who are paying attention, and the answers are very important. Hypothetical reactions to seeming unlikely situations can become real much faster than many would dream. That's why we must all be aware of our interconnection with others and the potential consequences of actions, or inaction. I must say I'm excited to see what comes next for this series, and I hope Star Wars continues telling stories like this. Today happens to be the release of The Mandalorian and Grogu, which will hopefully stand just as strongly. Tomorrow also happens to be my birthday, so you can like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to get me a present. Anyway, if you haven't yet watched Maul Shadow Lord, I'd highly recommend it. Don't forget to make time to live while you're surviving. Let me know if you have any differing opinions or any suggestions of other media I should cover. Just don't start a fight in my comments. Please like the video if you enjoyed and join the family if you want to see more nerdy shit like this. You can also find me across social media under the same name if you'd like to chat more. Remember, love recklessly. Start with yourself.